Kuf Nun Hey Amud Beis. We'll begin at Kuf Nun Hey Amud Aleph, right at the bottom. We discussed previously the Machlokes Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda, and Rav Yehuda's shita is that he holds Shavi Ochlas Mutter, to be matriach to an animal, to make something in an oichel. If the animal would not be able to eat this fodder without this tircha, then it's permitted to be matriach to make it something edible for it. But if it's something that it would eat anyway, it's just enhancing the food, that is awesome. So Tashma, the Gemara says we're going to have a kasha on Rav Yehuda Shita Mechatchen. It says you can cut up Mechatchen es adlum lifnei behema. You can cut up cucumbers, gourds before for the purpose of an animal. V'es nevela lifnei haklovim. And you can cut up the nevela for dogs, for the purpose of dogs, for them to eat it. So my love, Deloim Dumid and Nevela. So aren't we comparing the two? They're in the same category. Ma Nevela, now normally in Nevela it's meat. So Ma Nevela the Rechicha normally would be soft. Af Deloim the Rechicha. And also the Deloim are soft. So now if they're soft, that means that the animals, the behemoths, the dogs, they can eat this regardless. So what are you doing? Now by cutting it up, you're just enhancing it. You're making it easier for them to eat it. So don't you see over here that you could be matriach yourself for oichel, even something which is an oichel, which is edible, you still are allowed to enhance it. Alma tarchina ba'uchla. So you see that you're allowed to be matriach to improve the oichel. Utiyuf to Rav Yehuda, and it's a kashan Rav Yehuda. Amar al Rav Yehuda loy. Rav Yehuda would answer and say no. Nevela dumya dluim. It's not the dluim that we say dluim and dumya to nevela. It's just the opposite. Nevela dumya dluim. Ma dluim dashuni. Af nevela dashuni. Normally dluim are hard. So here also we're talking where in nevela, specifically in a case where it's hard, where it's tough meat. Veich mishkach slab basar pile. If you have literally an elephant, we're talking about where the meat is very tough, and therefore the dog cannot eat it without it being cut up. Inami vigirate zutri, or we're talking about puppies. We're talking about regular meat, but small puppies that can't eat it, they have small bones, small teeth, and jaws, so it's difficult for them to eat it, even if it's regular meat. So we're talking specifically in a case where it's not edible without cutting it up. Let's bring it right from the right. You can crumble up the straw and the fodder and animal fodder, and you can mix it together. Now, apparently, normally these things would be edible even without crumbling, even without mixing, and it says that you're allowed to crumble and mix it. You see that you can put effort into improving our food, enhancing it for the animals. More answers no. We're not talking in the normal case. Normally you would not be allowed to do. We're talking in a specific case over here. We're talking about tevin b'tiv nisar. The straw we're talking about is that it's spoiled. So unless you mix it with the fodder, with the good fodder, it's not going to be edible. And asfasa be'ile zutre. And the fodder we're talking about is with very young donkeys. So they can't eat it without crumbling. So it has to be crumbled and mixed, because otherwise the animal won't be able to eat it. So it's not called that you're matrichen with oichel. You're not being matrichen, it's not improving it. It's not tarchina b'uchla, it's shavi ochla. You're making something into something edible. It wouldn't have been edible otherwise, and you're making it edible, and that's why it's mutter. Zok the Mishnah, ein oivsim esagamel. You can't stuff a camel. V'loy dorsim, and not cram it, aval malitin, but you can put it down its throat. These are different, and the Gemara will discuss in detail different ways of force feeding an animal. To what extent can you force feed it? How much, how deep, in what manner? So there's different ways that it's mutter and different ways that it's awesome. So the details that we'll see in the Gemara, the general principle is that force feeding to a large extent, or perhaps with a kli, as we'll see in the Gemara. So according to some Rishonim, it's a tircha yasera. Now sometimes they would force feed an animal so that they would have a lot of food, then they wouldn't have to feed it regularly. Perhaps if they were traveling on a journey, going on a long journey, so they would feed it a large amount, large quantity at one time. They would force feed it, and then they wouldn't have to feed it for a period of time. This force feeding is also on Shabbos. According to some Rishonim, it's a tircha yasera. According to what the Meir says, the Rambam says is that we're concerned that if you feed in large quantities, you'll come to crush the food, the fodder. So again, we'll see what these terms refer to more precisely in the Gemara. Ve'ein mamir nesagolim, and for calves, you can't fatten up the calves. Aval malitin. Now, again, as we'll see in the Gemara, the general principle is the same between the different animals and even in the birds, which we'll see coming up shortly in the Mishnah. It's just that they have different terminology between the camel and between the calves and the chickens. So the Mishnah continues. So, vein mamir nesagolim aval malitim, but you can put it in their throats. Umahal katin l'tanagolim, and you can force feed the chickens. And you can put water with bran. In order to eat the bran, it has to be softened. You can put water with it. But you can't knead it. Kneading it, that's a problem of lisha. But this Tana holds, and we'll see in the Gemara who the Tana is, this Tana holds that just adding the water without mixing it, without kneading it, there's no lisha. So you're allowed to add the water, but you can't mix it together. But to give water, even water in front of bees and yanim shebeshayvech, you can't do. So we'll see in the Gemara why you can't give them even water. But you could give it into vazim and geese and chickens and yainu hardos, the type of pigeons that are raised, that are more domesticated, that are these types of pigeons that are raised, that a person raises himself. So we'll see the details in the Gemara, why the difference between these two categories of the birds and the bees, and is it dafka water, is it food? So we'll see the details in the Gemara. So Zok the Gemara, my ein oisim. So the Reish of the Mishnah said, ein oisim is a gamal. It says, ein oisim, you can't be oisim the gamal, v'loy darsin, and not darsin, aval mal itin. But you can put it on its throat. So what exactly does this refer to? Omar of Yehuda, ein oisim lo evus b'soich me'eha. It says, ein oisim, you can't put in such a large quantity of food that you make it like a trough, like a whole avos inside its me'ayim. You can't feed it to that extent. Frankly, more mikak hai gavna. Do we see this, that you can feed an animal to that extent? More says in, like he said, I once saw an Arab merchant, the ochla kora vatina kora. He fed his animal a core of fodder, of food. He gave him a core of food, which is 30 saw, which is a huge amount, 144 bayim, and vatina kora, and he loaded it up with a core with 30 saw to feed it along the way. So you see that it's possible that people do feed their animals to that extent. So, but this on Shabbos is also, this is a tircha yasera. Ein mamirim. So the Mishnah said you can't fatten up the calves. Ein mamirim. So it says, as far as the calves are concerned, the golem are concerned, it says ein mamirim, aval malitin, the malitin is a mutter. So frek the Gemara, ezi hamra veze halota. What is hamra, which is also, and halota, which is mutter? Omer of Yehuda hamra l'makom she'en yechol lahachzir. Hamra means you force feed it, you put it so far down the throat to a place where it cannot regurgitate it. It's already into the stomach, it can't bring it back. Halota l'makom she'en lahachzir. Halota is not that deep. It's a makom she'en lahachzir. So that's the difference between the two. Both are so deep. They're both very deep to a place. What's the difference? Hamra is with a kli. So ein mamirim. You can't do it with a kli, but by hand it's mutter. So it comes out, therefore, the Rav Yehuda holds that with a kli, it's also regardless. Even by hand, by yad, it's only mutter to a makom sheyechol lahachzer. But even by hand, by makom she'en yechol lahachzer, then it's also. Rav Chisda said that it's mutter by hand. It's mutter in any event. It's mutter. It's only also b'kli. Maser Rav Yosef Asakasha Mehalketin Latana Gailim. It says as far as the chickens are concerned, Mahalketin. Vein Sarach Lemer Shemalkitin. So there you are Mahalketin, and certainly Shemalkitin. Vein Malkitin Yayane Shaivech Yayane Aliyah. But for the Yayane Shaivech Yayane Aliyah, the doves in the doves coat, the dove coats, or in the attics, then you are not allowed to. Ein malkitin. Vein sarch leimer shein mahalkitin, and certainly ein mahalkitin. You can't be mahalkitin. So you can be mahaltal tana gailim and malkitin, but for the doves you can't do either of them. Now, according to Rav Yehuda, he says that what's mutter is only by hand, by biyad. By kli, it's also regardless. So therefore, my mahalkitin and my malkitin. So over here, when we say mahalkitin and malkitin, and as far as the birds are concerned, again, it's the same principle as birds, and in terms of the calves, it's just different terminology. So when we say mahalkitin, and when we say by the mahalkitin tarnagoyim, vein sarach leimer shemalkitin, what are the two categories? So my mahalkitin and my malkitin, ilema mahalkitin desaf lebiyadayim. That mahalkatin means that you can give it, feed it by hand. And malkitin deshara lekamayu, mahalkatin meaning you force feed it, you put it into their throats. Malkitin means you just throw it in front of them. So now we're saying by chickens, that's mutter. We're saying by the yain and by the doves, it's also meklal the yain shavya yain eliyah mishtek hamayu namilo. You can't even throw the food in front of them by the doves. How could that be? What's the problem? Why should that be also? Elalav must be mahalkitin l'mokum sheni chol lahachser, malkitin l'mokum sheni chol lahachser. That must be that's the difference, where we say the difference between the two is in place yachol lahachser or not. Mechlal, the hamra, bekli. So it must be therefore hamra is bekli, and when that's what's also. But by hand, it's mutter. In both cases, it's mutter. Even l'mokum sheni chol lahachser. It's used as Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda says no. Really, I'll tell you, mahalkatin means that it's by hand, and malkitin the shara kamayu, meaning with a kli is also in any event. What we're saying over here is mahalkatin is by hand, malkitin is you just throw it in front of them. You asked me, you can't even throw it in front of them. What should be the isser? No, it is also because hanem is an isser alecha. The chickens that we're talking about, they depend on you for food. You're responsible to feed them. That's why it's mutter. But vahani aim is an isser alecha. But for the doves, it's not your responsibility. They can find food elsewhere, so you can't even throw the food in front of them. Even that type of a tircha is also because it's not necessary. Gedasanya, like we learned in the Brisa, nice and mezainis lifnei kelev, you can put food in front of a dog, v'ain nice and mezainis lifnei chazir, but you can't in front of a chazir. Ma hefresh ben zala, so what's the difference between the two? Zem is a nice of alecha. The dog depends on you for food. But the chazir, it's also to raise a chazir, to raise pigs. So it's not dependent on you for food. You're not supposed to raise it, and therefore you can't even throw the food in front of them. You can prove it from the Mishnah, it's medui from our Mishnah, because we learned in the Mishnah, you can't put water in front of the bees or the doves in the dovecote. But you could put it in front of geese and chickens and the domesticated Yoneh Hardesias. My time, what's the difference between the two? Must be the difference is that the first category, that they don't depend on you for food, and the second category they do, and that's why it's mutter. If that's the case, why does it only mention water? You shouldn't even be able to give food for them, not only water, even food should be also to give to the doves. No, the difference is not the way you're suggesting. The difference is water is always, they can always get water. There's no need for it whatsoever. there's no need for whatsoever to give water for the doves because they can always find the water. They can fly and find water in the agam, in the ponds and the marshes. So there's absolutely no need for it. So you don't have a raya from the Mishnah to this chilik that you're making. Darish Rabbi Yanai, Darish Rabbi Yanai rather, a pischa de Menasiya, my dechsiv yedei tzadik din dalim. The tzaddik knows the suffering of the poor. Means Yedei HaKadosh Baruch Hu Tikelev Shem Elotzai Samuot. The Rebbeinu Shalom knows the suffering of the poor. The dog is considered poor. It doesn't have a lot of food. People don't feed it. At least in those days, that it was not somebody. The dogs, the stray dogs, people didn't feed them. And that's why its digestive system is different, and it digests very slowly. It takes 3 days to fully digest the food. So it stays in its stomach longer because it doesn't have that much food. If a dog swallowed meat, and then afterwards the dog died, is that meat still tome? So if the meat has been, while it's in the live dog, in the live creature, it's not tome. But when he died, if the meat over there would be considered to be still intact, then it would be tome. But after the time where it's already completely digested, then it's not considered to be meat anymore. So, kamatisha that how long does it stay in its stomach? And it's still considered to be tome. Shleisha Yomi Masechet, 3 complete days, 3 24-hour periods. If it's digested right away, like if you put something into a fire, it would get consumed right away. So you see the digestive period of a dog is 3 days, it's much longer. You see that it's proper derech eretz to throw some piece of meat to a dog, to have rachmim on it, to have mercy on it. How much? A size of its ear, and then hit it right away. Because otherwise, if you feed the dog will get attached to you and keep coming back for more, and you won't be able to get it off of you from being dependent on you. So therefore, give this for the food, but then hit it so that it leaves you alone. But that's only in an area like a desert, place where people aren't around. But if it's in the city, don't give it to eat. Because over there, it will tag along and it will follow you and won't leave you alone. Amara Papa, lest Anikim Kalba, there's no one poorer than the dog, and no one more wealthy than the chazer. The dog, people don't feed it there very much, and it doesn't have the food that it needs. Chazer eats everything, and therefore it eats everything, it eats garbage, and so chazer is the wealthiest. Tanya Kamasi, the Rav Yehuda, let's bring a ride to Rav Yehuda about what the difference is between the force feeding, the level that he said, whether it's only by hand, it's only mutter by hand, and where it's a place where Eina Yochel Lahachzer, it's also, but it's Yochel Lahachzer, it's mutter, but it's only by hand. What's the difference between the two? Hamra, Marbitza, Opaiki Gaspia. By Hamra, he makes it to kneel down, and he props its mouth open so that it can't close it. And he gives it veg and water to eat at the same time. Halata, he feeds it standing up. He feeds it standing up, and he does not force open its mouth. And and he gives it to eat. He gives it to eat and drink, and standing up. And you give the veg and the water separately. You don't do it at the same time. So, therefore, you see over here that halata is a place where can't go so far deep. The chilik is, if it's kneeling down, you can force feed it, and it goes to the malkum where it's very deep, and malkum shena yochel ha'achzer, and that's rather. So we say when it's kneeling down, so that's the case where we have hamra, that hamra is kneeling down, and therefore you can force feed it to a place where any yochel ha'achzer. But halata, it's not kneeling down, so you can't force feed it to a place she'ena yochel ha'achzer. So we see that that's a chilik. If it's a malkum she'yochel ha'achzer, eina yochel ha'achzer, but zev biyad and not bikli. So the Mishnah said that you can put in the water and bran together, but you can't mix it together. So Amrisa Kamei Damar Mas Nisan Mana, who's the Tan of the Mishnah? V'Amar Li Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehudi. It's Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, the son Yechad Noisan Es Ham Kemach, V'Echad Noisan L'Soicha Mayim. If one person brings the flour, and then another person, the second person, pours water into it. Ha'achron Chayiv, the Rabbi said that in itself, that's considered lisha, that's kneading, even though he didn't mix it, he just poured the water in without stirring it, without kneading it, that's considered lisha. But Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, he says you're not chayiv unless you mix it, so he holds that kneading has to be lisha as with mixing, which is like our Mishnah. Frankly, more no, Dilma, it's not so. Maybe Rav Yosef Rav Yehuda would argue in the case of a Mishnah. Ad kan loy kam Rav Yosef Rav Yehuda hasam elakema. Where did Rav Yosef Rav Yehuda say over there that it's mutter as long as you don't mix it? That's by flour. That's by kemach the bar gibelu, because it can't be mixed and kneaded into one mass. So maybe over there he says if you don't mix it, it's not gibel. Aval mursan the la bar gibelu, but bran, which doesn't mix and form one homogeneous mass, one solid mass. So perhaps over there, maybe he would be maida that lisha in that context is just adding the water even without mixing it. Where says no? The Sanya Behed we learn clear in the Brisa. He said you can't put water with bran. And he says clearly that you could. It's talking about bran, and you see that he said that you could add the water. So he is the Tan of the Mishnah.